Ethan Harper was 18, but to anyone passing through the quiet streets of Cedar Creek, Iowa, he seemed older. Not in age, certainly, but in demeanor. His posture was straight, his gaze steady, and there was an air of quiet determination around him that betrayed his youthful features. While most of his peers were worried about prom dates, college acceptance letters, or weekend parties, Ethan spent his evenings at the local shooting range, perfecting his aim. His obsession with precision was almost unnatural. Every bullet tracked, every shot measured, every breath controlled. It wasn't just a hobby. It was a calling he had felt since the first time his father had handed him a BB gun at the age of 8. Ethan's father, Thomas, had been a high school physics teacher who loved numbers, patterns, and exact measurements. He had taught Ethan about trajectories, wind resistance, and angles long before Ethan ever considered joining the military. His mother, Karen, a nurse at the local clinic, balanced the household with quiet patience and warmth, always concerned that her son's ambitions might carry risks beyond what a small town could contain. Yet she admired his discipline, even if she sometimes wished he would trade a few hours at the shooting range for time with friends. Cedar Creek was small enough that everyone knew everyone. Main Street boasted a single diner, a few gas stations, and a hardware store, all of which Ethan visited regularly. On Friday nights, teenagers congregated at the small park or the town's only bowling alley. But Ethan rarely attended these social gatherings. He had friends, sure people who laughed at his dry humor and teased him about his seriousness, but they could never fully understand the hours he spent in solitary practice. To them, he was focused, almost obsessively so. To Ethan, they were distractions from the goal that had quietly consumed his thoughts for years. Becoming the best sniper in the United States Army, it began innocently enough. At the age of 12, Ethan had joined his father on weekend trips to the range. The first time he fired a rifle, his hands had trembled, his heart had raced, but the thrill of controlling a weapon, of hitting a target dead center, was intoxicating. He remembered the precise moment he understood it was more than a game. The gun felt like an extension of his body, each shot a language of discipline, patience, and precision. By 13, he was entering local shooting competitions, often competing against adults twice his age, and quietly earning a reputation for uncanny accuracy. At school, Ethan was not an outcast, but he was always a little different. He excelled in math and science, enjoyed history lessons about military strategy, and spent lunch breaks sketching diagrams of ballistics trajectories in a small notebook he carried everywhere. Teachers admired his intelligence, though they occasionally worried about the intensity with which he pursued his hobbies. His peers, meanwhile, oscillated between teasing him and quietly admiring his calm confidence. Ethan never sought validation. He simply focused on improvement, each day a calculated step toward mastery. His younger sister, Emily, was his most loyal supporter. At 14, she idolized him. She would sneak into the garage to watch him clean his rifles, fascinated by the methodical care he took with each piece. One day, she would whisper, "You're going to do something incredible." Ethan would smile, ruffling her hair, but never responded directly. Words were unnecessary. Actions, he believed, spoke louder than boasts. Each precise shot, each record in his local competitions, each improvement in his aim, was a silent testament to what he was capable of achieving. Ethan's routine was meticulous. Weekdays began before dawn, with a light breakfast, a run-along, the creek that cut through town, and a review of his target sheets from the previous day. He kept logs of every shot fired, the distance, wind speed, angle, and even humidity. By the time he left for high school, he was already analyzing his progress, comparing results, and adjusting plans for improvement. Even at school, he would glance at physics textbooks not for grades alone, but to understand the principles that could enhance his accuracy. Though small-town life could feel stifling, Cedar Creek provided the freedom Ethan needed to nurture his talent. Open fields, quiet roads, and an abundance of space allowed him to practice long-range shots safely, without interference. He would lie prone for hours, studying the wind patterns and learning to compensate for subtle changes in direction. His father sometimes joined him, offering technical insights, while his mother brought food and drinks, watching silently with a mixture of pride and concern. Each session ended with meticulous cleaning of his rifles, a ritual Ethan treated as sacred. High school brought a new kind of challenge, balancing academics, part-time work at the hardware store, and ongoing marksmanship practice. Ethan thrived in structure. Each responsibility was another opportunity to exercise discipline. He was reliable, punctual, and quietly respected. Teachers often commented on his focus, while peers occasionally mocked his seriousness. But none of it affected him. Ethan had internalized a philosophy. Greatness required sacrifice, and distractions were the enemy of mastery. It was during these years that he first began to dream about joining the military. His interest had been piqued by documentaries about historical snipers and stories of extraordinary soldiers who changed the course of battles with a single shot. Ethan imagined himself in the uniform, not for glory or recognition, but for the challenge, the discipline, the precision, the ultimate test of skill under pressure. By the time he turned 16, he had mapped out a detailed plan: graduate early, enlist, and dedicate himself entirely to becoming the best marksman the Army had ever seen. Even socially, Ethan's focus was unusual. He attended school dances and local events, but always with a sense of detachment. Conversations with peers rarely lingered beyond casual jokes or shared interests. He preferred deep, solitary reflection, examining his techniques, visualizing shots, or studying military history. His teachers noticed his maturity and often remarked that he seemed older than his years. His peers sensed it too, a quiet intensity that separated him from the crowd. Despite his rigorous schedule, Ethan remained grounded. He helped neighbors with odd jobs, tutored younger students in math, and spent weekends assisting his mother at the clinic. Responsibility was never a burden to him. It was training, in its own way, for the challenges ahead. Every interaction, every task, every precision-driven moment added to his foundation. By the time graduation approached, Ethan was not only prepared academically, but also mentally and physically ready for the demands of military life. On the eve of his graduation, Ethan sat alone on the porch of his childhood home. The evening sky blazed with pink and gold hues over the rolling Iowa fields. He held his target notebook in his lap, flipping through pages filled with numbers, calculations, and notes on wind patterns and distances. He thought of the countless hours spent alone in silence, the small victories and the failures that had refined his skill. Somewhere in the quiet, deep inside, Ethan knew that his life was about to change, and that this was only the beginning of a journey that would take him far beyond Cedar Creek. When the first firework exploded in the distance, signaling the start of the graduation celebration in town, Ethan didn't cheer or join the crowd. Instead, he quietly closed his notebook, feeling the weight of the path he had chosen. The shot that would define his future, the one that would shatter records, redefine expectations, and prove that age was irrelevant, was still years away. But for the first time, he allowed himself to imagine the impossible, standing in a distant field, rifle in hand, eyes focused, heart steady, and history waiting for him on the tip of a single bullet. By dawn the next morning, Ethan would leave for the next phase of his life: enlistment, training, and the transformation from a small-town boy into something extraordinary. The quiet streets of Cedar Creek, the supportive but cautious parents, the younger sister who admired him, all of it would remain a part of him. And with every shot fired, with every lesson learned, Ethan Harper was taking the first steps toward a destiny that no one, not even he, could yet fully imagine. The day Ethan Harper left Cedar Creek, the town seemed smaller than ever. He hugged his parents tightly, feeling their mix of pride and apprehension. His father, Thomas, clasped his shoulder firmly, murmuring words of advice and caution. "Remember, Ethan," he said, "discipline matters, but so does humility. A steady hand is nothing without a steady mind." His mother, Karen, pressed a small photo of the family into his pocket. "This is your anchor," she said softly. "No matter where you go, we're with you." Emily, his younger sister, refused to look him in the eyes. Biting her lip to keep from crying, Ethan boarded the bus bound for the nearest military recruitment center, a mix of excitement and anxiety stirring inside him. The road stretched endlessly, cornfields and farmhouses passing in a blur. Each mile seemed to separate him from his childhood, while bringing him closer to the unknown. His mind was alive with calculations, not just numbers, but possibilities. He considered the challenges ahead, the discipline that boot camp would demand, the harsh reality of military life, and most importantly, the opportunity to hone his marksmanship to unprecedented levels. At the recruitment center, the atmosphere was both intimidating and energizing. Other enlistees milled about, some talking nervously, others laughing loudly to mask fear. Ethan observed them quietly, analyzing their movements, noticing the subtle shifts in posture, the tension in hands and shoulders. When the recruiter called him forward, he felt a wave of certainty. This was the step he had been preparing for his entire life. Forms were filled, questions answered, and paperwork signed. Each step felt momentous, each signature a commitment to a path that could not be undone. The recruiter, a burly man with a graying mustache, raised an eyebrow as he reviewed Ethan's file. "You're 18, he said, "and your background shows extensive marksmanship experience. Ever considered special forces training?" Ethan's pulse quickened. The mere suggestion seemed surreal. "I want to challenge myself," he replied calmly. "I want to be the best I can be. That's all that matters." The recruiter gave a rare smile, recognizing determination in a young man few could claim to possess at such an age. Physical exams and psychological evaluations followed. Ethan approached them with precision, as if each test were another target on the range. His strength, endurance, and mental clarity impressed every examiner. They noted his focus, his calm demeanor, and his analytical mind. Even the psychologists were intrigued by the quiet confidence he exuded. Unlike many recruits, Ethan did not seek attention. He did not brag, joke, or compete for recognition. Instead, he approached the process with the same discipline he had applied to shooting for years: preparation, focus, and flawless execution. Leaving the recruitment center, Ethan's world seemed to shift. The small victories of his childhood, the awards from local shooting competitions, and the encouragement of his family had all led to this moment. He was officially enlisted. The path forward was unknown, and the reality of military life loomed large. Yet, there was no hesitation in his heart. The challenges that awaited boot camp, rigorous training, and the eventual pursuit of sniper mastery were precisely what he sought. Each step would refine him, each test would define him, and every hardship would prepare him for the moment when skill and opportunity converged. Boot camp began in earnest with an intensity Ethan had only glimpsed in training videos. The mornings were cold and unforgiving, the drills relentless. Recruits were pushed to exhaustion, their limits tested physically and mentally. Ethan, smaller than some of the older trainees, struggled at first with the sheer weight of the routines, push-ups, runs, obstacle courses. But his determination never wavered. He visualized each drill like a shooting exercise, breaking it down into angles, timing, and technique. Slowly, he found a rhythm, his body responding with precision, muscles adapting, and endurance building. Instructors were brutal, demanding perfection at every turn. "You are not here to be ordinary," they shouted, their voices echoing across the training ground. "You are here to be disciplined, to be strong, to be sharp." Ethan absorbed their words, letting them fuel his focus rather than fear. He watched peers struggle, some giving up, others succumbing to exhaustion. He learned to pace himself, balancing effort and endurance, refusing to allow pain to dominate. Each completed drill became a quiet victory, proof that preparation, focus, and mental control could overcome any obstacle. Social challenges emerged alongside physical ones. Recruits eyed Ethan with curiosity, some with respect, others with thinly veiled disdain. He was the quiet one, intensely focused, often alone, and younger than most. Rumors circulated, mocking his age and apparent seriousness. Yet Ethan remained unaffected. He had long accepted that the pursuit of mastery often demanded isolation and sacrifice. Friendships would come later. For now, every second spent on discipline, observation, and skill building was precious. His quiet intensity became his shield and his strength. Ethan's early days in boot camp revealed more than physical and mental endurance. They revealed character. Each obstacle forced him to confront fear, fatigue, and doubt. Nights in the barracks were sleepless as recruits studied manuals or reflected on the day's failures. Ethan, however, spent them reviewing his marksmanship techniques, memorizing strategies, and visualizing scenarios that combined precision, patience, and calm under pressure. He imagined distant targets, environmental variables, and wind adjustments training, his mind as rigorously as his body. By the end of the first week, instructors began to notice subtle differences. His reactions were quicker, his focus unshakable, his ability to absorb instruction exceptional. Mentorship appeared unexpectedly. A retired sniper, now an instructor at the base, observed Ethan quietly during range exercises. The man's eyes, sharp and analytical, followed every movement, every breath, every trigger squeeze. After one particularly flawless shot, he approached. "Ethan, kid," he said, voice low and measured, "you have something most men twice your age don't. Precision, patience, and calm. Ever thought about sniper school?" Ethan, slightly taken aback, met his gaze steadily. "Yes, sir," he replied simply. The acknowledgement sparked a new level of determination. The opportunity was real. The challenge was extraordinary. And Ethan felt the weight of potential resting squarely on his young shoulders. Weeks passed. The routine, once grueling, became a rhythm. Ethan learned to balance exhaustion with focus, fear with precision, and social isolation with the camaraderie, slowly forming among recruits who respected skill and discipline. Physical improvements were dramatic. Mental resilience sharpened daily. Each day, the specter of failure loomed, but each day, Ethan met it head-on, converting stress into performance. The early skepticism of peers began to fade as whispers of his talent circulated quietly through the ranks. By the midpoint of boot camp, the 18-year-old recruit was no longer just another teenager. He was a rising presence, defined by focus, precision, and an unshakable drive. By the end of Part 2, Ethan had faced the first real test of his resolve, leaving the familiarity of home, submitting to the harshness of military structure, and proving himself among men who had lived longer and endured more. The experience was both humbling and exhilarating. He realized that raw talent alone would not suffice. Success demanded discipline, mental fortitude, and relentless dedication. And as he lay awake in the barracks each night, reviewing the day, refining techniques, and planning improvements, one thought remained constant. The journey had only begun, and the shot that would change everything was still waiting on the horizon. Boot camp intensified as the days turned into weeks. The cold mornings were particularly punishing. Mist hung over the training grounds like a silent adversary, soaking clothes and chilling bones. Recruits scrambled through obstacle courses, crawled through mud, and executed grueling drills that left many gasping for air. Ethan Harper, though younger and slightly smaller than most, faced each challenge with a quiet determination that set him apart. His muscles ached, his lungs burned, and yet he pushed forward, observing every movement, calculating every step, and learning to turn exhaustion into efficiency. The instructors were relentless, demanding absolute precision in every task. "You are here to be molded," one barked, his voice cutting across the compound. "Ordinary men leave here broken. Only the disciplined survive." Ethan absorbed the intensity without complaint, internalizing every command as though it were part of a carefully constructed strategy. He noticed the smallest details, the alignment of boots, the cadence of steps, the timing of breaths. Every exercise became a mental puzzle, every motion an opportunity to refine his focus. His age, once seen as a weakness by peers, became irrelevant in the face of his unyielding resolve. Social friction emerged almost immediately. Many recruits resented Ethan's quiet competence. Older trainees scoffed at the teen who didn't complain, who didn't seek attention, and whose precision often outshone theirs. Rumors whispered through the barracks, questioning his abilities and mocking his youth. Ethan, however, was impervious. He had long understood that mastery required focus, not approval. While others sought validation in loud displays or bravado, Ethan sought it only in improvement, in the subtle satisfaction of a task executed flawlessly. Slowly, respect began to replace skepticism, though grudgingly and quietly among his peers. Physical challenges were only part of the test. Mental fortitude was equally critical. Recruits faced days without rest, unexpected drills, and situations designed to provoke fear or frustration. Ethan found solace in routines he had developed years before: controlled breathing, mental visualization, and compartmentalization. When the instructors simulated stressful combat scenarios or pushed recruits to their limits, Ethan's mind remained calm. He visualized trajectories, environmental variables, and potential responses, transforming fear into tactical advantage. This ability to maintain composure became his trademark, attracting the attention of instructors who valued not just skill, but temperament. Marksmanship exercises were where Ethan truly excelled. While peers struggled with consistency under pressure, he adapted instinctively. Wind, elevation, recoil all became variables he adjusted for almost without conscious thought. Instructors observed, noting how the young recruit's precision defied expectations. While others were praised for isolated successes, Ethan consistently delivered flawless results, demonstrating both technical mastery and unwavering focus. Yet he never celebrated, never flaunted his skill. Each success was catalogued quietly in his mind, another step toward the ultimate goal: sniper proficiency beyond measure. One particular drill pushed Ethan to his limits. Recruits were sent into simulated terrain with challenging visibility, tasked with hitting targets at extreme distances while under the pressure of time constraints. Sweat stung eyes, mud clung to fatigued bodies, and the cold gnawed at skin exposed by worn uniforms. Many faltered. Frustration caused mistakes, nerves disrupted aim. Ethan, however, relied on methods honed over years. He calculated angles, measured wind, adjusted for distance, and exhaled at precisely the right moment. The bullet struck its target dead center. A silence followed, broken only by the instructor's approving nods. Ethan had not only succeeded, he had demonstrated mastery under extreme pressure. Nighttime brought reflection and preparation. The barracks, dimly lit and quiet, became a space for introspection. Ethan reviewed the day's drills, noting errors, successes, and areas for improvement. Fellow recruits slept, talked, or complained about exhaustion, but Ethan devoted these hours to mental rehearsal. Each movement, each shot, each decision became an exercise in anticipation. Slowly, he built an internal map of his own performance, learning to predict mistakes before they occurred and to reinforce precision instinctively. It was grueling work, but essential. Mastery demanded not only talent, but an obsession with self-perfection. Mentorship deepened during this period. The retired sniper who had first noticed Ethan's talent approached him more frequently, offering guidance beyond the technical. "Skill alone isn't enough," he said one evening, his voice low and deliberate. "A sniper must understand patience, observation, and ethics. One shot can change everything. Never let ego interfere with judgment." Ethan listened, absorbing every word. For the first time, he realized that the path he had chosen demanded not just accuracy, but wisdom, restraint, and mental resilience. Each lesson became a building block, preparing him for challenges far beyond the range. The social dynamics of boot camp remained complex. Rivalries flared, especially with trainees who resented Ethan's consistent performance. One older recruit, a former high school athlete named Carter, became a particular challenge. Carter mocked Ethan's youth, criticized his quiet demeanor, and openly challenged his skill. At first, Ethan ignored the provocations, focusing solely on improvement. But tension simmered, culminating in a high-stakes shooting exercise where both were tasked with precision shots under strict conditions. Carter faltered under pressure, while Ethan executed flawlessly, earning grudging respect from the instructors and silence from the once boastful rival. The culmination of these trials was a selection process for advanced sniper training, a program few were chosen to attend. Instructors assessed performance, composure, adaptability, and ethical judgment. Ethan's scores were impeccable, but more importantly, his ability to maintain calm under stress distinguished him from older, more experienced recruits. When his name was called, the reaction was a mixture of awe, surprise, and disbelief. Many peers could not believe an 18-year-old had earned such an opportunity. For Ethan, however, it was a logical next step, the beginning of a journey he had quietly envisioned for years. Leaving the initial phase of boot camp, Ethan felt a mix of relief and anticipation. He had endured exhaustion, ridicule, and extreme physical and mental demands, yet he emerged not only unbroken, but stronger, sharper, and more focused than ever. The recognition, though gratifying, mattered less than the confirmation of progress, that discipline, preparation, and calm under pressure could overcome any obstacle. In the quiet moments of reflection, he considered the future advanced sniper. School, rigorous tactical training, and the ultimate test that would define his skill. A possibility of record-breaking mastery loomed like a distant, thrilling horizon. Ethan's family remained a constant source of grounding. Letters from home arrived during the rare moments of reprieve, reminding him of Cedar Creek, his parents, pride, and Emily's admiration. They were anchors to a simpler life, a reminder that, no matter how far he traveled or how high he soared, humility and connection were vital. He responded carefully, sharing experiences without boasting, revealing his growth and discipline rather than triumphs. This quiet communication reinforced his resolve, balancing ambition with perspective, and ensuring that his journey remained rooted in the values instilled from childhood. By the conclusion of Part 3, Ethan had achieved more than most could imagine. At his age, boot camp had tested his body, mind, and character. He had faced ridicule, physical exhaustion, and mental strain, yet he emerged prepared for the next challenge: advanced sniper training. Each lesson, each challenge, each sleepless night had contributed to a foundation that would support extraordinary Achievements. Ethan Harper, the quiet, determined 18-year-old from Cedar Creek, was no longer just a recruit. He was a soldier on the verge of greatness, poised to step into a world where precision, patience, and skill would define his destiny. Ethan Harper stepped onto the grounds of the Advanced Sniper School with a mixture of awe and determination. The facility sprawled across acres of rugged terrain, dotted with shooting ranges, camouflage training zones, and simulated urban environments. He felt the weight of expectation in every step, the knowledge that only the most precise, disciplined soldiers thrived here. The air smelled of gunpowder, pine, and earth, a stark reminder that this was no ordinary training ground. Every sound, every shadow, every shift in the wind could be a lesson. Ethan's mind raced with anticipation. Here, skill would meet challenge, and precision would be tested to its limits. The instructors were veterans of countless missions. Their reputations etched into the military's history. They did not tolerate mistakes, flinches, or overconfidence. Each word they spoke carried authority. Each glance could detect hesitation. A sniper is not merely a shooter, one instructor announced on the first day. They are observers, strategists, and masters of patience. One miscalculation can cost lives, and one perfect shot can change history. Earn your place here, or leave. Ethan absorbed the gravity of the statement, understanding that this school demanded more than talent. It demanded total immersion, both mentally and physically. Daily routines were brutal. Dawn broke with physical conditioning. Runs over uneven terrain, obstacle courses through forests, and hours of calisthenics. Recruits were forced to carry heavy gear over miles, learning endurance while maintaining focus. Ethan's body, strengthened by boot camp, adjusted rapidly, but the true test was mental stamina. Sleep deprivation, hunger simulations, and complex tactical exercises pushed recruits to exhaustion. Even minor mistakes were corrected harshly. Yet Ethan thrived, drawing on his lifelong discipline. Each physical strain became a mental exercise. Focus under fatigue, calculation under pressure, and anticipation of challenges before they arose. Shooting exercises became progressively more demanding. Recruits were tasked with long-range targets. At extreme distances, often with shifting wind and changing light conditions, Ethan applied principles he had studied for years. Angle calculations, wind compensation, humidity adjustments, and trigger control. Each successful shot was analyzed in detail by instructors, who critiqued posture, breathing, and timing. While older recruits struggled with complex calculations in real time, Ethan's mental agility allowed him to adapt instinctively. Precision, patience, and timing became his allies. Slowly, instructors began to take notice. The 18-year-old was not just performing well, he was exceeding expectations consistently. Camouflage and stealth exercises were equally rigorous. Recruits learned to blend seamlessly into the environment, to move silently, and to remain undetected for hours at a time. Ethan adapted quickly, using his observational skills honed in Cedar Creek to read terrain, adjust positions, and predict environmental shifts. Hours could pass without action, yet he remained alert, focusing on details imperceptible to others. Instructors began placing him in scenarios designed to push his endurance further. Extended observation posts, night exercises, and simulations of high-stakes missions. Ethan excelled, demonstrating a combination of patience, skill, and mental resilience that set him apart. Rivalries intensified in this elite environment. Carter, the older recruit from boot camp who had once mocked Ethan, was here as well. The two were now pitted against one another repeatedly in tactical exercises and shooting drills. Carter's frustration grew as Ethan consistently outperformed him, not through arrogance, but through meticulous preparation and calm execution. Peer dynamics shifted subtly. Respect replaced derision, though competitiveness remained fierce. Instructors encouraged these rivalries, knowing they pushed recruits to extremes. Ethan embraced the challenge quietly, seeing Carter's presence as another variable to overcome rather than an obstacle to resentment. Observation skills became a central focus. Instructors emphasized that a sniper must see beyond the obvious, predict enemy movement, analyze terrain, and anticipate environmental changes. Ethan applied his analytical mind rigorously, taking notes, sketching diagrams, and mentally simulating scenarios repeatedly. Each day, he improved not only his marksmanship, but also his tactical reasoning. His ability to remain calm under scrutiny and pressure became legendary within his group. Instructors whispered about him among themselves, noting that the young recruit's composure and adaptability were rare even among seasoned soldiers. Advanced exercises introduced extreme conditions, desert heat, dense forest, urban combat simulations, and mountainous terrain. Recruits faced long waits, variable weather, and unexpected scenarios designed to induce stress and test judgment. Ethan thrived, using mental visualization techniques honed over years. He imagined trajectories, wind, shifts, and elevation adjustments, internalizing every detail. Mistakes were scrutinized, but he learned from each failure, adapting strategies and refining skills. Instructors began assigning him increasingly difficult tasks, often placing him in situations meant to challenge the most experienced recruits. Ethan met every challenge with quiet determination, transforming pressure into performance. Ethics and responsibility were emphasized as heavily as technical skill. Instructors drilled home the gravity of a sniper's role. One shot could save lives or end them. Recruits were evaluated on decision-making as much as accuracy. Ethan internalized these lessons, reflecting on his training in Cedar Creek, the values instilled by his family, and the responsibility he carried as a soldier. Precision without judgment was dangerous. Skill without ethics was hollow. Each exercise became a moral as well as technical test. He learned to balance instinct with analysis, decisiveness with restraint, and focus with empathy. Progress was evident. By the midpoint of the program, Ethan had distinguished himself not only through technical mastery, but also through consistency, composure, and tactical insight. Instructors increasingly consulted him, testing his judgment in scenario planning and simulation exercises. His peers began seeking advice, often reluctantly, recognizing the value of his calm, methodical approach. Even Carter, once a rival fueled by envy, showed signs of grudging respect, though tension remained. The 18-year-old recruit was no longer just a talented shooter. He was emerging as a leader, an observer, and a soldier whose potential was becoming impossible to ignore. The culmination of advanced sniper training approached, a final evaluation, designed to test every skill acquired: precision shooting, patience, observation, and ethical decision-making. The instructors described the exercise in stark terms: long distances, variable terrain, simulated enemy presence, and a single target that must be neutralized without error. Failure would mean a reset, additional training, or even expulsion. Ethan approached the challenge with the same meticulous preparation he had applied throughout his life. He visualized every angle, calculated every adjustment, and rehearsed every step mentally, turning anxiety into anticipation. Even in the days leading up to the evaluation, tension crackled across the facility. Recruits trained under simulated combat stress, faced sleep deprivation, and endured environmental extremes. Ethan, however, found a rhythm in the chaos. He meditated briefly each morning, reviewed notes at night, and remained present in every drill. His mental clarity and calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the visible strain of his peers. Instructors began whispering among themselves, noting that few recruits, regardless of age, exhibited such consistency and poise under extreme conditions. By the final day, Ethan's skill, discipline, and preparation had coalesced into a singular focus. He approached the shooting range with confidence tempered by respect, understanding that this was not just a test of ability, but a measure of his growth as a soldier. Every breath, every movement, every calculation mattered. As he assumed his position, eyes steady on the distant target, he felt the culmination of years of practice, discipline, and determination. The final evaluation would not merely measure talent, it would define his place in the history of sniper excellence. The morning of the final evaluation arrived with a weight that pressed on every recruit's shoulders. The air was cold, crisp, and still, the kind of silence that seemed designed for snipers. Ethan Harper woke before dawn, as he had every day during training, but this morning felt different. His heartbeat was calm but deliberate, his body sharp with awareness. Today was not only about passing a test, it was about proving that every long hour, every sacrifice, and every lesson had prepared him for this exact moment. The instructors gathered the recruits in silence. No speeches, no words of encouragement. Just a terse explanation. Each sniper would face a scenario designed to test observation, patience, and precision. The final target was positioned at a distance far beyond standard qualification, so far that even veteran shooters often struggled. The shot had to be made under strict conditions: unpredictable wind patterns, shifting light, and limited time. Failure meant starting over, but success meant something rarer: a place in the ranks of history. The recruits listened, faces tense. Ethan simply nodded, his mind already running calculations. When his name was called, he stepped forward with quiet confidence. Carter shot him a glance, somewhere between envy and reluctant admiration. The instructors led Ethan to a high ridge overlooking a vast valley. Rolling terrain stretched into the distance, dense patches of forest, dry grassland, and rocky outcroppings. Somewhere within that landscape, nearly 2 miles away, sat the target, a steel plate barely larger than a man's chest. No guideposts, no markers, no hints. The wind was inconsistent, swirling unpredictably as it raced between the hills. The sun hung low, casting sharp shadows that shifted minute by minute. Ethan dropped to the ground, laying out his rifle with the precision of ritual. Every movement was deliberate. Bipod extended, scope adjusted, breathing slowed. He pressed his cheek to the stock, exhaled once, and scanned the valley. He found the target quickly, his eyes sharp from years of training. But distance made it nearly invisible to the naked eye, just a small square in an ocean of terrain. Through the scope, it was clearer but daunting. The distance, measured by instructors, was over 3,400 meters, nearly unheard of in training. It was designed to break confidence. He began his calculations. Wind was the first variable, and it was cruel that day. Gusts shifted direction unpredictably, sometimes calm, sometimes strong. Ethan studied the movement of grass, leaves, and dust across the valley. He noted how shadows moved, how light refracted through heat rising from the earth. Temperature, humidity, air pressure, every factor entered his mental equation. While others might panic under the weight of such variables, Ethan found focus. His mind organized the chaos into patterns, reducing uncertainty into measurable adjustments. His notes, rehearsed 100 times in training, guided his thought process like second nature. Minutes passed. Instructors watched silently, clipboards in hand, eyes narrowed. They had seen many recruits falter rushing the shot, miscalculating wind, or succumbing to nerves. Ethan, however, remained still. His breathing slowed further, steady and rhythmic, almost meditative. His finger rested lightly on the trigger, but did not tighten. He was waiting not just for a clear shot, but for the perfect convergence of variables. Patience was his weapon now, sharper than steel, stronger than fear. Even Carter, standing among the recruits, could not help but notice the unshakable calm radiating from the 18-year Dashel. Finally, the moment arrived. The wind stilled for just long enough. The sun's angle offered clarity, and the target stood defined against the earth. Ethan inhaled deeply, exhaled halfway, and held. His fingers squeezed, not pulled, releasing the shot with surgical control. The crack of the rifle echoed through the valley, a sharp report that seemed to slice through the silence. The bullet began its impossible journey, nearly 4 seconds of flight through shifting air, gravity pulling downward, wind whispering sideways. Every variable Ethan had calculated now carried weight, guiding the round toward destiny. The impact rang out faintly, metallic and absolute. The steel plate vibrated from the strike, a sound so crisp it carried across the valley like a declaration. Instructors froze, their eyes flicking between the target and Ethan. He had done it, not just a hit, but a direct center strike at a distance where even veteran snipers rarely succeeded. One shot, one chance, perfection. The valley seemed to hold its breath in that moment, as if the earth itself acknowledged the magnitude of what had just occurred. The silence broke with murmurs among the recruits, then stunned exclamations. Even the instructors, hardened and unshakable, exchanged glances of disbelief. The distance was unprecedented, the precision unmatched, the patience unteachable. Ethan rose slowly, his face calm, his rifle steady. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply acknowledged the result with the quiet dignity of someone who had expected nothing less. Inside, however, his chest burned with pride, not arrogance, but the deep satisfaction of knowing he had honored every lesson, every sacrifice, and every ounce of effort it had taken to get here. Carter's expression was a mixture of awe and defeat. For weeks, he had resented Ethan's presence, his skill, his calm confidence. But now, watching him accomplish what seemed impossible, even Carter felt compelled to respect him. He muttered under his breath, "Unreal." For the first time, there was no rivalry, only recognition. Ethan hadn't just outshot his peers. He had redefined the boundaries of what was possible. The instructors approached, their faces unreadable. One of them, a veteran sniper with more than 2 decades of combat experience, stared at Ethan for a long moment before speaking. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" he asked. Ethan, still calm, replied, "I hit the target, sir." The instructor shook his head slowly. "You didn't just hit it. You shattered every record this school has ever held. That was over 2 miles with conditions that should have made it impossible. That wasn't just skill, that was history." Word spread quickly. Within hours, instructors were relaying the event to their peers, commanders, and higher-ranking officials. A recruit barely 18 had accomplished what seasoned professionals struggled to achieve. The record books would need rewriting. Whispers began circulating across the base and beyond. The boy from Cedar Creek had done the impossible. Ethan, meanwhile, remained grounded. For him, it wasn't about records or recognition. It was about living up to the standard he had set for himself years ago, under the quiet skies of his hometown, where he first dreamed of becoming a soldier who could make every shot count. That night, the atmosphere among the recruits was transformed. They gathered around Ethan, some with genuine curiosity, others with admiration. Questions poured in. How had he calculated the wind? How did he stay so calm? Did he even feel nervous? Ethan answered humbly, explaining his methods without arrogance. "It's all about patience," he said softly. "You don't control the shot. You wait for the moment when everything lines up, and then you let it happen." The simplicity of his explanation made it even more impressive. Instructors later recorded the event in detail, marking Ethan's shot as one of the longest and most accurate ever made in a controlled setting. His file was flagged for immediate attention from higher command. This was no longer just a talented recruit. They had in their hands a potential asset of extraordinary value. Discussions began quietly behind closed doors. Where would Ethan's skills be best applied? Who would mentor him next? And how could the military shape this young sniper into a weapon for missions few others could attempt? For Ethan, the shot was not the end, but the beginning. He lay awake that night, staring at the barracks ceiling, replaying the moment in his mind. He thought of his family, of Cedar Creek, of the countless hours of practice that had brought him here. He thought of the responsibility that came with such skill, how one shot could save lives or end them. He understood more deeply than ever that precision wasn't just about hitting targets. It was about purpose, ethics, and knowing when not to pull the trigger. The next morning, instructors addressed the recruits. Yesterday, history was made, one declared. What you witnessed was not luck. It was discipline, preparation, and execution at the highest level. Harper's shot will be studied for years, not because he's special, but because he committed himself fully to the craft. Learn from that. Ethan listened quietly, knowing that his journey was far from over. The road ahead would be even more demanding. But for now, he carried with him the knowledge that he had done what many thought impossible. And in doing so, he had etched his name into the legacy of snipers forever. When dawn broke the morning after Ethan's impossible shot, the base already buzzed with whispers. Soldiers, recruits, and even instructors spoke of him with a mix of disbelief and admiration. By breakfast, his name carried across the mess hall, like a ripple through water. Some said the story was exaggerated. No 18-year-old could land a shot at that distance. Others swore they had seen it with their own eyes, and that the valley itself had echoed with the truth. Ethan sat quietly, eating in silence, unaffected by the growing storm of attention. For the instructors, the matter was less about rumor and more about fact. They had logged the shot, measured the distance, and confirmed the impact. The documentation was airtight. What unsettled them most was that Ethan's performance had shattered the ceiling of expectation. He hadn't just passed the test, he had obliterated it. By mid-morning, high-ranking officers began arriving on base, summoned by reports that sounded more like myth than reality. Colonel Mason, a battle-hardened veteran who oversaw sniper operations for the region, came personally. To review the event, he asked to meet Ethan face-to-face. A summons arrived during drills, and when Ethan walked into the briefing room, he found the colonel waiting with a half-circle of officers, their faces stern. "Private Harper," Mason began, his gravelly voice echoing. "You understand why you're here." Ethan stood tall, eyes forward. "Because of the shot, sir." The colonel studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Correct. I've seen seasoned marksmen miss at half that range under ideal conditions. And you, an 18-year-old recruit, hit dead center under some of the worst. That isn't skill alone, that's instinct." Ethan didn't flinch. "I've trained for it, sir. Every shot is a responsibility. I just did what I've prepared for." His humility struck the room. Many recruits, thrust into sudden fame, might have cracked under the weight of pride. Ethan's calm presence only reinforced what the colonel had been told. This wasn't arrogance, it was discipline. Mason leaned back, folding his arms. "You're wasted in standard training. From this point forward, you'll be reassigned." They announcements sent ripples through the recruit corps. Ethan was pulled from his regular squad and transferred to a specialized unit designed to groom candidates for advanced sniper programs. This was no ceremonial promotion. The new unit trained under harsher conditions, with fewer men, tighter supervision, and higher stakes. Only the most promising recruits were ever invited, and most didn't last. Ethan, however, welcomed it. He wasn't there for recognition. He was there for challenge, for growth, for the chance to test the limits of his ability. The training was relentless. Days stretched into grueling marathons of physical endurance, followed by nights spent in the field with little sleep. Instructors pushed the unit through swamps, deserts, and dense forests, forcing them to adapt to every environment. Where others broke, Ethan thrived. His endurance was sharpened by sheer willpower, his accuracy undiminished by fatigue. In one exercise, recruits were tasked with stalking a mock target across miles of terrain without being detected. Most were spotted within hours. Ethan remained invisible for nearly 3 days, crawling through mud, using shadows as cover, and becoming part of the landscape itself. But the program wasn't just about marksmanship. It was about mindset. Instructors drilled them with scenarios where hesitation meant mission failure. Ethan learned that being a sniper wasn't about pulling the trigger. It was about patience, restraint, and clarity of purpose. You're not killers, one instructor told them. You're guardians. Every shot you take carries weight. Sometimes the greatest skill is knowing when not to fire. Those words carved themselves into Ethan's mind, shaping not just his skill set, but his philosophy as a soldier. News of his progress spread beyond the base. Military publications wrote about the teen sniper who had broken records. Commanders whispered about the future of such talent. The army wasn't just training a recruit anymore. They were cultivating a weapon, a symbol, perhaps even a legend. Ethan avoided the headlines, keeping his head down, but he couldn't ignore the shift around him. Strangers saluted him with respect. Fellow recruits, even rivals like Carter, deferred to him. It was a strange burden for someone so young. Yet Ethan bore it with quiet strength. Carter's transformation was perhaps the most telling. Where once he had sneered at Ethan, now he watched him with curiosity. One night, as the unit huddled around a fire during field training, Carter finally spoke. "How do you do it, Harper? You don't break. You don't crack. You just keep going." Ethan looked at him calmly. "It's not about me. It's about the mission. If I fail, others suffer. That thought keeps me steady." Carter was silent for a while before nodding. For the first time, there was no resentment, only respect. Weeks turned into months. Ethan's skills only sharpened. He learned to shoot through wind tunnels, over water, and at targets obscured by glass and foliage. He trained with spotters, mastering the silent language of hand signals and trust. He practiced on moving targets, vehicles, and timed scenarios where seconds determined success. Each challenge raised the bar, but Ethan met it head-on. The instructors began using him as an example, telling others, "Watch, Harper. That's what discipline looks like." Yet Ethan remained grounded. Letters from home kept him tethered to Cedar Creek. His mother wrote about the farm, the changing seasons, and how proud the town was. His younger brother scribbled drawings of rifles and stars, idolizing him. These reminders reminded Ethan of who he was fighting for, not glory, not headlines, but the people who believed in him. That sense of responsibility weighed on him more heavily than medals ever could. One day, Colonel Mason returned. He gathered the unit in the briefing hall, his tone serious. "What you've endured here is more than most soldiers will ever face. Some of you will continue to regular service. Some will advance to specialized divisions. But one among you," his gaze shifted to Ethan, "has caught the attention of the highest levels of command." The room stilled. Mason continued, "Private Harper, you are being recommended for an experimental program, one reserved for the most exceptional candidates. It's voluntary, but if you accept, it will take you further than you've ever imagined." Ethan stood silently, absorbing the words. The colonel's gaze was unwavering. "You've proven your ability. Now the question is, are you willing to carry the weight that comes with it?" Ethan thought of Cedar Creek, of his family, of the shot. That had changed everything. He thought of the responsibility he already felt every time he laid his finger on the trigger. Then, steady as ever, he answered, "Yes, sir, I'm ready." The colonel nodded, a rare smile flickering across his face. "Then history may have only just begun writing your name." That night, Ethan lay awake once more. The barracks were quiet, his fellow recruits asleep, but his mind was alive with possibilities. He didn't know where this path would lead, what missions awaited, what sacrifices would be asked of him. But he knew this. He would face it with the same patience, precision, and purpose that had carried him this far. The legend of the 18-year-old recruit wasn't just about one shot. It was about what came after the journey of a young man becoming something greater than himself. The orders came quietly, delivered in a sealed envelope to Colonel Mason's desk. Within hours, Ethan Harper was summoned. He stood at attention as Mason laid out the reality. This wasn't training, this wasn't simulation, this was alive. Mission. A U.S. reconnaissance team had been pinned down by insurgents in the Afghan mountains, their extraction cut off. Satellite imagery showed a high-value hostile sniper commanding the ridge line, keeping American forces trapped. "They need a counter-sniper," Mason said grimly. "You'll be inserted with a small unit. Your job is simple. Take out the marksman. Lives depend on it." Ethan nodded. Simple in description. But he knew better missions like these were never simple. Still, there was no hesitation. "Understood, sir." Preparation began at once. He checked his rifle meticulously. Each piece oiled, each adjustment precise. His spotter, a seasoned corporal named Diaz, introduced himself with a firm handshake. "I've heard about you, kid. Records are one thing. Combat's another. Out there, no second chances." Ethan met his eyes calmly. "That's why we'll get it right the first time." Diaz smirked. "Confidence, I like that. Just make sure it's backed by steel." The insertion was brutal. A helicopter carved its way through the cold mountain air, blades chopping against the wind. The team huddled inside, their faces painted with grime and determination. Ethan sat in silence, rifle across his knees, eyes closed as if in meditation. He was reviewing the mission in his head, replaying every possibility. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. 2 minutes out. Hearts quickened, grips tightened on weapons. Ethan's remained steady. They touched down under fire. Bullets cracked against rocks as the team scrambled for cover. Dust and smoke filled the air. Diaz dragged Ethan behind a boulder. "Welcome to the front line, Harper. You ready?" Ethan scanned the ridge through his scope, eyes narrowing. The hostile sniper had perfect control of the terrain. Every time an American soldier moved, a shot pinned them down. Ethan could sense the opponent's discipline, their patience. This wasn't some random gunman. This was a duel. Ethan's mind shifted into the zone. Time seemed to slow. He studied wind drift, the angles of fire, the glint of sun against stone. He noted where the enemy's shots came from, small disturbances on the ridge, faint trails of dust. "There," Ethan whispered, pointing Diaz toward a narrow shadowed outcrop. Diaz nodded. "Good eye, but it's almost 2,000 yards. Wind's tricky." Ethan exhaled slowly. "Then I'll wait for it to align." The standoff stretched on. Minutes felt like hours as Ethan and Diaz remained frozen, watching, calculating. The pinned team below grew desperate, radioing that their ammunition was running low. Pressure mounted. Diaz whispered, "We need that shot, kid. Now." Ethan inhaled deeply, calming his heartbeat. His scope locked onto the ridge, finger resting lightly on the trigger. He didn't see just rocks and dust. He saw patterns, the rhythm of the enemy's fire, the subtle shift of cover. Then, in the briefest glimmer of movement, He caught it. The shimmer of a scope reflecting sunlight. Ethan fired. The valley echoed with the report, and for a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then, no return fire. Diaz grinned wide. You got him. Relief surged through the pinned team as they scrambled to safer ground. Over the radio, a voice crackled. Counter-sniper neutralized. We're clear. Ethan allowed himself a single breath of satisfaction before returning to alertness. The mission wasn't over. The team advanced cautiously up the ridge, securing the sniper's nest. Ethan studied the fallen adversary, a weathered marksman, clearly experienced, his rifle customized and worn from years of use. Diaz crouched beside him. You just went toe-to-toe with one of their best. And you won. Ethan's gaze lingered. He was good. He deserved respect. He closed the enemy's eyes with a gloved hand. For Ethan, even victory carried weight. The extraction was tense but successful. By nightfall, they were back at base. The soldiers who had been pinned down came to Ethan personally, shaking his hand, some even embracing him. You saved our lives out there, one said, voice thick with gratitude. Ethan simply nodded. For him, the mission wasn't about recognition. It was about duty fulfilled. Colonel Mason called him in the next morning. His expression carried both pride and caution. You did well. Better than anyone could have asked. But don't mistake success for invincibility. Combat has a way of humbling even the best. Ethan nodded. I understand, sir. Mason leaned forward. Do you? You killed a man yesterday. Not in training, not on paper. A man. That weight never leaves you. Ethan was silent for a long moment. Finally, he answered, I know. And that's why I'll never waste a shot. Mason studied him closely, then nodded slowly. Good, because more will come. Bigger missions, harder decisions. And I need to know you're ready. Word of Ethan's first mission spread quickly through the ranks. Some hailed him as a prodigy. Others muttered that no 18-year-old should carry such responsibility. But Ethan ignored the chatter. His focus remained on training, on sharpening himself for what lay ahead. He spent long hours on the range, in simulations and in tactical briefings. The records meant nothing to him now. What mattered were the lives hanging in the balance. Each time he pulled the trigger. In the weeks that followed, Ethan was deployed on several more missions. Each tested him in new ways. Sometimes it wasn't about making the shot, it was about waiting, holding position for days without sleep, enduring hunger and cold until the right moment arrived. Other times, it was about restraint, choosing not to fire when civilians strayed into the crossfire. Each decision carved itself into his character, forging him into more than just a marksman. He was becoming a soldier defined not by glory, but by conscience. Yet, with every success, the weight grew heavier. At night, when the barracks grew quiet, Ethan would sit alone, replaying each mission in his head. He saw the faces of enemies through his scope, men who never saw him, but whose lives ended by his hand. He remembered their silence, their stillness. He knew they, too, had families, beliefs, reasons. That truth haunted him, but it also strengthened his resolve. Every shot he took had to matter. Diaz noticed the burden one evening. You carry it heavy, don't you? Ethan looked up from cleaning his rifle. It should be heavy, otherwise we lose ourselves. Diaz nodded slowly. You're wise for your age, Harper. Most of us don't learn that until it's too late. As his missions stacked, so did the attention from higher command. Ethan was no longer just a promising recruit. He was an asset. His name began appearing in classified reports, whispered in the halls of strategy meetings. Some saw him as a weapon, others as a symbol of what discipline and instinct could achieve. Ethan himself refused both labels. To him, he was simply a soldier doing his part, but history had other plans. His next orders weren't just another mission. They were the beginning of something larger, something that would test not only his skill, but his very soul. As Ethan prepared for deployment, Colonel Mason's final words lingered in his mind. "Every legend is written in blood, Harper. Make sure yours is written with honor." That night, Ethan lay awake, the hum of the barracks filling the silence. He thought of Cedar Creek, of his family, of the boy who once trained on hay bales in a quiet town. Now he was a soldier, tempered by fire, carrying the lives of others with every shot. He didn't fear what came next. He only feared failing those who counted on him. And so, with the dawn, the 18-year-old recruit readied himself for the next chapter of his journey. No longer just a record-breaking sniper, but a young man stepping into the crucible of destiny. The orders came sealed under the highest classification. Ethan Harper was summoned to Colonel Mason's office, where the atmosphere felt heavier than any previous mission. Mason's eyes, usually sharp and steady, carried an edge of unease. He gestured for Ethan to sit, then slid a dossier across the table. "This isn't just another assignment. This is history." Ethan opened the folder. Photographs spilled out, grainy satellite images, surveillance reports, and the face of a man feared across continents. The target was no ordinary combatant. It was a warlord who had orchestrated dozens of deadly attacks, a man who had eluded intelligence agencies for years. Now he was spotted in a mountain compound deep within hostile territory. Removing him would cripple enemy operations for years to come. But there was a catch. The compound was fortified, surrounded by guards, and perched on a cliffside nearly 3,000 yards away from any possible vantage point. No one had ever attempted a shot from that distance in combat, not successfully. Mason's voice was low, almost reverent. "You'll be positioned here," he pointed at the map, marking a distant ridge. "It's a 3,000-yard shot. Wind currents, elevation, temperature shifts, it's beyond what's been done before." He paused, locking eyes with Ethan. "If you fail, the target escapes. If you succeed, you change the course of this war." Ethan closed the folder slowly. He didn't speak right away. The weight of it pressed down on him, not fear, but responsibility. Finally, he said, "When do we leave?" Mason nodded firmly. "Tomorrow. Get your rifle ready. And Harper, this mission, it will define you." The night before deployment, Ethan lay awake in the barracks. He thought of Cedar Creek, of the hay bales and windmills where he first learned to steady his aim. He thought of his father's stern lessons, of the first time he felt the stillness in his soul before pulling a trigger. Now, that stillness would be tested like never before. He whispered to himself, "One shot, make it count." The insertion was covert. Ethan, Diaz, and a small special operations team hiked under cover of darkness, scaling jagged ridges with the weight of silence pressing on them. The climb was grueling, the thin mountain air burning their lungs. At last, they reached the vantage point. Ethan set up his rifle, the long barrel extending like an arrow toward the compound. He checked and rechecked his equipment scope, wind meter, elevation adjustments. Everything had to be flawless. Through the scope, he saw the compound come alive at dawn. Guards patrolled the perimeter, their rifles glinting under the rising sun. And then he saw him, the warlord, a tall figure in dark robes, moving with the casual arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. He was surrounded by bodyguards, yet exposed enough for a shot, if only distance and physics could be conquered. Diaz crouched beside him, eyes darting between the target and the environmental. Readings. 3,000 yards. This is madness. Ethan didn't flinch. Madness or not, it has to be done. He began his calculations. Wind at varying altitudes, humidity, the curvature of the earth itself. Every factor had to be accounted for. He adjusted the scope by fractions, movements so small they seemed imperceptible. The warlord paused near the edge of the compound, speaking with his men. This was the window. Diaz whispered, "If you're going to take it, it has to be now." Ethan inhaled deeply, his body melting into stillness. He felt his pulse slow, his breathing sync with the rhythm of the earth. In that moment, the noise of war, the chaos of the world, faded into silence. There was only the scope, the target, and the infinite space between them. He squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out like thunder, echoing through the valley. For nearly 5 seconds, the bullet traveled a lifetime in the heart of a sniper. Ethan held his breath, eyes fixed on the target. Then, in the compound below, the warlord collapsed, struck cleanly in the chest. The bodyguard scrambled in panic, but it was too late. The shot had found its mark. Diaz exhaled sharply, his voice a whisper of disbelief. You actually did it. 3,000 yards. My God." Ethan didn't smile. He simply lowered his rifle, eyes still steady. "Target down, let's move." The team exfiltrated under fire, enemy forces realizing too late where the shot had come from. Bullets ricocheted off stone as they raced down the mountain, but somehow the unit made it out intact. When they finally reached the safety of extraction, Ethan felt the weight of the moment settle over him. He had just made the shot that would be studied, debated, and remembered for generations. Back at base, the news spread like wildfire. Young recruit, barely 18, had shattered every sniper record with a single pull of the trigger. Officers spoke his name in awe. Soldiers whispered it with pride. The mission reports called it a miracle of precision. But Ethan rejected the glory. When asked how he did it, he simply answered, "Discipline, patience, and one chance I couldn't waste." Colonel Mason called him in, pride blazing in his eyes. "You've done what no one else could. That shot will echo across history. But remember, Harper legend or not, you're still a soldier. And soldiers fight not for records, but for the lives behind them." Ethan nodded, his voice calm. "Yes, sir. That's all I've ever fought for." As weeks passed, the story spread. Beyond the military, journalists whispered about the unnamed sniper who had struck from impossible distance. Politicians hailed the mission as a turning point. But for Ethan, life remained simple. Training, discipline, readiness for whatever came next. He carried himself without arrogance, without hunger for fame. In the quiet of the barracks one evening, Diaz turned to him. "Do you realize what you've done? People are going to call you a legend." Ethan shook his head. "I don't want to be a legend. I just want to make sure the people counting on me get home alive." Diaz smirked. "Well, kid, whether you want it or not, legends have a way of writing themselves." And perhaps he was right. Because somewhere, across the world, young recruits would hear the story of the 18-year-old who defied the impossible. They would whisper about the calm, steady hand that shattered every sniper record with one impossible shot. But for Ethan Harper, it was never about the record. It was about the stillness in his soul, the discipline forged in Cedar Creek, and the unshakable belief that every life saved was worth the burden of every trigger pulled. As dawn broke the next morning, Ethan stood on the training range, rifle in hand, eyes fixed on distant targets. He was already preparing for the next mission. Because legends may echo in history, but soldiers live in the present. And Ethan Harper knew his journey had only just begun.